The roar that had defined Indian Wells for the better part of a week went quiet all at once. 16,000 people who had been the loudest crowd at the tournament sat in a silence that felt heavier than any noise. The final ball from Linda Noskova had clipped the tape and fallen on Eala's side of the court, and just like that, the run was over. The scoreboard was clinical and cold in the way that scoreboards always are, showing a result that told you what happened, but nothing at all about what it felt like to be inside that stadium in the moment it did. Eala had given everything she had, and it had not been enough, and the desert air around Stadium 1 carried the particular weight of a loss that meant more than a match. If you've been following this story and you want to stay with it through everything that comes next, through Miami and the clay season and the long road ahead, subscribe to this channel now and hit the bell. We cover the Eala story the way it deserves to be covered, honestly and completely, including the hard moments as well as the triumphant ones. Now let us talk about what really happened at Indian Wells, what it looked like from the inside, and what it means for everything that follows. The match itself was a battle between two young players both fighting hard, but on the day, Noskova was the sharper of the two, more consistent at the critical moments, more able to find her game when the pressure was highest. Eala had beaten players of significant quality during the tournament, and it shone throughout the week that she belonged at this level. But Noskova on this particular afternoon was better, and the result reflected that reality without softening or complication. A loss is a loss, and in professional tennis, the scoreboard does not distinguish between a match you lost playing your best tennis and one where you could not find your game at all. What separated this loss from a routine exit was everything that surrounded it. The crowd that had packed that stadium had not come to watch a neutral tennis match. They had come to be part of something that had been building across the entire tournament, across the entire season, and in many ways across years of following a young woman from the Philippines who had come to represent something far larger than her ranking or her results at any individual event. When the match ended, they did not leave. They stayed in their seats and they chanted her name. And the sound of that chanting in the aftermath of a defeat was something that even the most experienced people inside professional tennis said they had rarely heard before. There is a specific kind of love that shows up most clearly when things go wrong, when the result has already been decided and there is nothing left to cheer for except the person themselves. What the fans inside Stadium 1 at Indian Wells showed Eala after that loss was exactly that kind of love, the kind that does not require a win as its condition. They were not consoling a champion who had fallen short of a title. They were telling a 20-year-old who had just lost a difficult match that their feeling for her had nothing to do with the score and everything to do with who she is and what she means to them. That is a different thing entirely, and it is rarer than trophies. The visible emotion of the walk-off was real, and it was not manufactured for cameras. Eala had spent the entire tournament carrying the hopes and the energy of a community that had traveled from across the world to be there, that had been chanting in the stands for every match, that had made Indian Wells feel, for the duration of her run, like a home court for the Philippines. When that run ended, the weight of everything she had been carrying, the expectations, the responsibility, the awareness of what every point meant to every person watching, came down at once. Standing at the net and then walking to the sideline to collect her things while thousands of fans stayed in their seats calling her name, she was processing something that most athletes never experience at her age. The collision of personal disappointment with collective devotion is not a simple thing to navigate. In the locker room, away from the stands and the cameras, the full emotional release that had been held back during the public walk-off finally came. This was not weakness. This was a young athlete who had been carrying an enormous amount for an extended period of time and who was now in a space where she did not have to manage how it looked to anyone watching. The towel over her face, the stillness, the 20 minutes of sitting quietly before anything else, these were the natural responses of someone who had cared deeply and come up short and needed time to sit with that before they could begin to think about what came next. The deeper story of her recovery from the loss began sooner than anyone outside her immediate circle would have expected. Martina Navratilova, one of the most technically perceptive minds the sport has ever produced, reached out in the aftermath with the kind of direct and honest feedback that only someone with genuine respect for a player would offer. The message, as reported by people close to the situation, was not sympathetic in the way that softens the truth. It was honest in the way that actually helps. Navratilova told Eala that Noskova had not beaten her, her own tension had. She told her that carrying the weight of an entire nation's expectations at 20 years old was an extraordinary burden, and that the key was learning to set the flag down when she stepped onto the court, to play with the freedom of someone who loves the game, rather than the anxiety of someone managing a responsibility. She told her to reclaim her joy. That kind of feedback from that source is not something a young player receives often. Navratilova's assessment of tennis is shaped by decades of competing at the highest level of the sport, and then spending years watching and analyzing what distinguishes the players who reach their potential from those who carry weight they cannot quite release. Her observation about tension being the opponent was specific and actionable, and Eala's response to it was immediate. Rather than flying home and allowing the loss to settle into the kind of extended reflection that can harden into doubt, she went back to the practice court, working specifically on the parts of her game that had not been at their best in the match, rebuilding confidence through repetition in the hours when most people around the tournament had moved their attention to other matches and other players. That choice to return to the court quickly and to work rather than rest in the immediate aftermath of a painful loss says something important about the professional character Eala has been developing. The players who sustain success at the elite level of tennis are almost universally characterized by a short recovery window. They feel the loss fully because you cannot learn from something you have not genuinely experienced, and then they turn toward the next challenge before the feeling has fully passed. Waiting for complete emotional recovery before beginning to prepare again is a luxury that a professional sports calendar does not offer. The question is always what you do with the time you have between the loss and the next match, and going back to the court to work on your serve in the California desert night is one kind of answer to that question. The impact of her exit on the tournament atmosphere was something that the people responsible for running the event felt immediately and concretely. The energy that had characterized Indian Wells during the period of Eala's run, the flags, the noise that carried across courts and through walls, the sense that something culturally significant was happening alongside the tennis, thinned noticeably once she was out of the draw. Fans who had built their entire tournament experience around her matches had less reason to stay. Some departed for home, others stayed, but with a different quality of investment. The tournament continued, and the remaining matches were played by excellent players competing at the highest level of the sport, but the specific atmosphere that the Filipino community had created around Eala's presence was gone, because the presence that had generated it was gone.
This was not a surprise to anyone who had been paying attention across the season. The same pattern had played out at the Australian Open, in Dubai, and at multiple other events. The Eala Effect on tournament attendance and atmosphere is documented across enough events now to be treated as a consistent and predictable phenomenon, rather than a one-time novelty. Her exit from a draw changes the energy of the tournament around her. That is an extraordinary thing for a player ranked where she is ranked, and the people who run these events are increasingly aware that they need to factor it into how they think about scheduling and promotion. The fans who had stayed in the stands after the match ended, and those who gathered outside the facility in the hours that followed to show that their support was not contingent on a result, were demonstrating something about the nature of the relationship between Eala and her community that goes beyond normal sports fandom. In most sporting contexts, the emotional investment of a crowd tracks closely with the fortunes of the player or team they support. When things go well, the energy rises. When they go badly, it falls. What the Indian Wells crowd showed was a different model, one where the connection is deep enough to sustain itself through a loss and to express itself most clearly in the moments when the usual justification for celebration has been removed. Eala's own response to the outpouring, the decision to stop and face the people who had waited through the night to see her leave, was consistent with every other decision she has made about how to relate to her community throughout the season. She did not manage the moment behind glass or process it in private and then release a statement. She stepped out and spoke directly, in the language of someone who understands that what her fans have invested in her journey is not just enthusiasm, but something that deserves to be met with equivalent honesty and presence. The message she delivered was not a consolation, it was a declaration. She told them this was not an ending, it was a reset, and she told them that what they had brought to the desert was not wasted because the tournament was over, it was carried forward into everything that came next. Miami was waiting. The clay season was on the other side of Miami. Roland Garros was on the other side of the clay season. The road stretches out long, and the losses on it are not detours. They are part of the route. The Dragon, as her fans call her, was not finished. She was in the process of becoming, and becoming is a journey that includes defeat as well as triumph, and that cannot be rushed or bypassed or managed around the hard parts. The Indian Wells run ended with a loss. It also ended with 16,000 people refusing to leave, fans standing in the dark outside the stadium with phone lights raised, and a community spread across more countries than any single tournament could hold, waiting to follow her to the next stop. That is not the ending of a story. It is the end of one chapter in a story that has a very long way left to run. We will be with you for every chapter that comes next. Subscribe to this channel and hit the bell so you never miss a moment of this journey. The clay season is coming, Miami is coming, and this community will be the first to know what happens when the Dragon steps back onto the court. Stay with us.